Hey everybody, it's Ryan, and I'm going to go over some awesome stuff about the squat, learning how to become more mobile, flexible, learn how to get you in better squatting positions. And what I'm going to do in this video is kind of give you my approach in teaching someone how to squat, or kind of my viewpoint, and some of the things I look for. There are kind of two ways to mobilize, in my opinion, or my viewpoint when it comes to mobility and working on flexibility issues. There's the day that you're going to train, right? There's the day one, you're going to work out. You're going to work out, you're going to squat, you're going to deadlift, you're going to bench, whatever you're going to do. And you mobilize stuff that doesn't feel that good so that you're ready for the movements. Like mobilize your hamstrings and your hips if you're going to be doing some heavy deadlifts, if you're going to be doing some squats. Probably need to work on your adductors, hip flexors, depending on kind of where your sticking points are as far as when it comes to bad movement or bad motor pattern. But when you're on your off time, training, or off time like recovering, resting, and doing other random things, maybe at night, maybe in the morning, maybe watching a movie, or watching a TV show, you mobilize, you stretch, you foam roll, you do your best to kind of work on things that you need to work on. Typically, I'll tell you right now, the two number one things that most people need to work on a regular basis, if you are one of those people that are very stiff and tight like me, is your ankles, the calves. Having good dorsiflexion is pretty hard to come by. And probably one of the most important things I've seen for people to do, like the hardest thing in the world, this is why most people can't front squat really well. It's one of the reasons, not the only reason, is that they can't get good dorsiflexion. They can't get a good enough knee forward. So they either have to heels come off the ground, they lose their balance. And basically, like for example, like my feet are pretty close together. This is a pretty close stance for me. I'm wearing slippers. Take these off. And if I have a close stance and I try to squat down, and I try to keep my body as upright as I can, like as if I'm going to front squat, you can't see it maybe, but my right heel is actually starting to come off the ground, right? So I have to pitch forward to keep my heel on the ground. That's a fault if I'm front squatting, because if the bar is going to sit on my shoulders, it's going to drop forward. So I kind of have to push my knee forward. But if I have Olympic weightlifting shoes, they'll make a big difference because it will allow me to. It'll give me that extra range of motion. So let's just pretend like I have Olympic weightlifting shoes on right now, keep my body upright, and then I'll be able to kind of stay a little bit more upright in my position. But ultimately, the ankles is one of the biggest bottlenecks when it comes to mobility and things that people need to work on a regular basis. But one thing I wanted to say is that, or I wanted to go over, is that when someone is squatting, I want to show you different squat positions. So I'm squatting here, my feet are, this is basically my squat stance, alright? I'm not wearing any shoes, so I have no support. And you'll see my feet as I squat down. You can see how my heel comes off the ground. So that's a real big bottleneck there. But luckily I have shoes that kind of buffer that and deal with that problem, which is not really a good way of doing it, but that's just the reality of how things are. But when I view someone squatting, sometimes one of the biggest things that they do when they squat, basically right here is where my bottleneck is, so you're going to be able to see my problems. But when someone squats, what happens typically is they'll dump in and their knees will come in, so that way they can sit. And what that does is it basically makes it so that they can get to the bottom of the squat or lower, basically the parallel like I am right now, right? But the problem with this position, it's bad because my pelvis is having to butt wink. You can't really see it from this angle, but I'm basically internally rotating and dumping forward so that way I can get to the bottom. A stronger position when you're squatting lots of weight, that's really not going to be a good position when you're loaded. And that's another topic which I'll talk about later on, which is, you know, squatting with a load, squatting without a load. There's a big difference. But you want to create torque at the bottom, push your knees out and squat. We know this already. This is nothing new. But let's talk about what faults you want to look for when you see someone make a fault in their movements that makes it difficult for them to squat. So one of the best ways I look at when we talk about mobility and assessing kind of where people are is their hip function and kind of what happens. So what typically will happen is I'll get someone to box squat, right? And typically what will happen is they'll come down, it'll end up being too low. So they have two options from this spot. I haven't hit the box yet. Alright? I'm going to sit down. I have two options. I can dump, do a slight butt wink, which is not terrible. Or I can push my knees out more to get more external rotation torque. And then sit. You require my adductors and external rotators to work a little bit harder, which requires them more flexibility. So typically what you're going to see when someone squats is they squat down like this, And then again, I was talking about them dumping. So this is kind of something you need to get a trained eye for when you're coaching somebody, or maybe when you just kind of look at your own movement when you're squatting, is look at the knee as it relates to the ankle or the middle toes, right? And that's what you want to look at. You want to look at the middle toes and the middle of the foot and the knee, the middle of the kneecap. And you want them to sort of line up when you're watching someone move. And typically what happens in lots of people is they'll turn their feet out like this, and their knees will come in. And it won't look like, if you're a strong athlete and you've been squatting and you have a pretty decent squat, you probably buckle in a little bit sometimes as one of your faults. It's a lot of people's faults. So what they'll do is when they go into a squat, they'll squat down, like I'm squatting down right now. They'll come in just a little bit like this. So this would be considered knees in. If you're NASM certified, knees in, this would be considered knees in. Because the knee is basically this way. It's basically pointing towards the big toe. So I need to be more out like this, or I need to be more like this. Well, it's still required, because this is really bad, because then I have valgus knee where the knee starts to come in and you're going to separation here, or not separation, but you have pressure here on the medial ligament. So if you point the foot forward, right, it has a better position. So more quadricep activation, but a better position of the knee. So from this position here, I'm actually much better. And interestingly enough, my knee doesn't bother me on this side. This knee always gives me some sort of problems. I squatted yesterday, and this has been giving me some issues sometimes. So how do we fix this? What do we do? Well, if you see my adductor videos of how to foam roll them, you can look at those if you want to see those. But I just kind of want to give you my viewpoint of kind of how I dissect things for people. Is that if I see this, right, and I'm training them, right, sometimes you don't have a lot of time when you're training somebody, or maybe you just want to do a quick stretch and you don't want to spend 40, 30 minutes mobilizing in the middle of your training session because you only have so much time. Think about the movement for a second and take a look at kind of what you need to work on, right? Think about that for a second, right? You got your knees, they come forward, right? And they are coming out, or they're coming in. So how do you do this? Well, one of the simple things to consider is to mobilize in the position of restriction, or the position of the shape you're trying to create. In this case, you're trying to create external rotation torque, right? Knees out, right? And one of the best stretches for that is to stretch that out. So as a simple stretch, like I'm sitting here, right here, I'm basically making this up as I go along, as one way to stretch a client or show a friend or someone that you're working out with that has some problems having their knees dump in just a little bit, or even yourself, is to simply push their knees out like this to stretch out their inner thigh muscles and also stretch out their external rotators here at the hip. And then you can put your elbows into the middle of your, into your knees, and then you can sit. Even if your heels are off, it's okay. All you're trying to do is you're trying to stretch out the inner thighs and hips, and you're trying to create this position of improvement. Because the problem is when they're squatting, or when you're squatting, or when someone's squatting, they're dumping in like this. And what you need to do is you need to create this movement so you can just simply squat down. So quite often when I train a client, I'll have them just sit down into a squat, touch the ground, position themselves to hold, and then they'll just sit and stretch. And that's all they're going to do. They'll hold this for maybe about 2 minutes. And that's all they'll do. Another simple one, kind of a better one in my opinion, is you get them to try to really over-exaggerate the stretch in their piriformis. Again, get the elbow knee here. And I learned this from, a lot of stuff is all Kelly's repackaged K-Star stuff, so I just kind of like showing you kind of how I use a lot of his methods for things. So piriformis stretch here. And see how I'm creating this external rotation. I'm pushing out away from my midline, stretching out my piriformis, right? So I'm really stretching this out. And depending on how stiff and tight you are, you might actually feel your inner thighs and adductors, right? So this is kind of like sort of the bottom of a squat. Sort of, not quite. To get closer, to get a better stretch, simply you'll slide the foot a little further out, like this. So that way you're kind of in a position where your toes are coming off the bench or whatever platform you're using, or maybe a squat box or something. And what you're doing is you're trying to stretch out this piriformis and stretch out the inner thigh. And think of it like this. You're not so much stretching out, you're trying to encourage that restriction to give you more freedom and give you more options. Because the reason why your knees are coming in on a squat is because you have no options. Or your strongest option is to dump in. And arguably, one of the biggest reasons why your knees dump in the first place is because when your knee comes in, your quadricep gets to activate, and you get more quadricep involvement, but from a very bad leveraged position on the knee. Typically the ACL, the MCL, all those ligaments get stressed out pretty badly. So you can see how I'm creating this basically a one-legged squat. And interestingly enough, I'm actually stretching my tighter side. So you can kind of see a difference after I retest. And then keeping your chest tall, tighten your stomach, lean in, and then push out harder. You can get a little bit more of a stretch. You can actually kind of slide back a little bit more. And then you can kind of create more of an inner thigh, adductor, piriformis stretch. You can even just put your foot flat, lean in, and push out this way so that your foot's more flatter. And again, you're just creating that shape of stretching the inner thigh. Now think about this for a second. This is kind of why I like that adductor or inner thigh kettlebell rolling, is you get to, if you mash this inner thigh stuff up, you're going to be able to improve kind of the sliding surfaces of the tissue, so that way when you are in this position to stretch, you'll have better movement. And sometimes you don't even really need to, you might not even need to stretch, just to improve your movement for the day. Okay, so, and then another thing, one more thing I'll say, is that when you're in this position here, I forgot to mention, is that I like to turn my body in a lot, because this is where I'm really tight, and bring my opposite shoulder to my knee like this. And then I can lean in and really stretch it out. And then you kind of go back and forth. Again, you're just hunting for where you're tight. And just in this video alone, you'll probably be able to see some improvement, I hope. Well, this is kind of how I really determine like what's effective for clients and myself. And what I do is like, you know, I mean, everything from Kelly Starrett, right? Test, retest, test, retest. If you stretch your piriformis, like a common piriformis stretch is this one here, you know, for probably regular people maybe, they'll pull their knee in. And I've done this stretch before, but that thing didn't do anything for me. It didn't improve anything. If my muscles were tight, it did stretch it out, but it didn't improve the way I moved. There's not really much I can really show you other than tell you that this has actually improved quite a bit. It feels a lot better. So all you're trying to do is you're trying to stretch, mash his inner thigh muscles. So this piriformis, glute. Remember the glute inserts here, right? Top of the butt, or sacrum, iliac, ilium. Sorry if I get the markers wrong or the landmarks wrong on the bones. But they attach to the top of the pelvis here, inside right here, and the fibers run along like this, right? And how do you know this? Well, if you're in the bodybuilding or seen some shows, some really shredded bodybuilders, big guys, shredded glutes, right? Shredded glutes. So you'll see the fibers actually kind of pennate like this, right? Then you have your glute medius, which is underneath that maximus, and has the same sort of pennation. And I'm showing you these directions because when the muscle pulls, it wants to do this. This is kind of why when people's knees buckle in, right? The reason why they buckle in is because this is why your glutes are weak, or why people say your glutes are weak, is because the glutes are unable to mechanically control this knee to come out better. So, and typically what makes your leg dump in is your inner thighs being tight, and then also your quadricep wants to kick in and push you up, because that's where your strength is, or where you are able to create the most amount of force in the position that you're in. Maybe you get to the bottom of the squat, then you come up. So those are my stretches. That's my mobility lesson for the day. Hope you enjoyed it. Click like if you haven't already. Help me out. Share this video with someone if you think it'll really help them. Typically coaches, or maybe some athletes out there that are really into squatting, that want to improve themselves and find some quick stretches. These are kind of like my go-to stretches that I like to use and share with people. And actually when I'm training someone, you know, maybe a client walks in 10 minutes late, 5 minutes late, you get them under the bar, you do some warm-up sets with the barbell, do some light stretching, maybe they don't have time to foam roll, you only have like maybe 40 more minutes with them. You have them warm up a bunch of times, really lightweight, and in between you see them, and during some of the repetitions on lightweight, you see their knees buckling, right? So then you have them do some of these stretches for just a few seconds on each side, and then their movement will dramatically be improved. That's sort of kind of the design of these. This is how I use it in my day when I train clients. Use these tools that best fit your situation, whether it be for you or helping another individual. Stay tuned for more cool stuff coming down the pipeline. Share this video with other people that you think that'll help, so that way I can help grow my channel. Would like to create more content like this, and click like if you haven't already. Subscribe if you're not a subscriber. If you like more stuff like this, leave some comments below for some other stuff you like to see. It does help me create better content for the channel. I have a bunch of stuff coming out. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next video.